everybody, to our newest episode of the She Speaks series. And today I have a woman that we featured a couple months ago, Heather Hiscox. Heather is just an amazing person. So she is the founder and CEO of Pause for Change. And then she's also the co-creator of the Possibility Project. So I'm so glad to have her here with us today. She's just a plethora of knowledge. But she also has a really interesting story and journey. So thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
So I know with a lot of the work that you do, a lot of it, right, what you do right now stems in predominantly nonprofit work.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the journey that you took to get to where you are now with Pause for Change and Possibility Project?
Oh, yeah, I love to. So I do go way back when I start sort of describing the winding path that I took. And I also want to frame my experience with knowing that I appreciate people with winding paths. And I think that the variety of things that I've done has really helped to add a depth to the work. So any of you that are listening to this and think, oh gosh, I've had a winding path, or I've freaked out my family, or been worried about where I'll end up, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I always like to say that. So when I go way back, I talk about my family. So you wouldn't know it from looking at me, but my grandmother is Costa Rican. She's Tica, and my mom's name is Rosita Alvarado, and she looks just like me. And so, growing up with a diverse background and an interesting family was fun. And my mom was always focused on social justice and helping community. And so, I think her passion for doing work in community organizing really, became a part of me at an early age. And then my dad was the Air Force practical guy that made us say, like, how are you actually going to pull that off? So it was a great combination to grow up with. And so I've always been involved in social impact, from nonprofit fundraising, program design and development. I really love research, having a hypothesis and doing experimentation to test it. And my work with Pause for Change really started when I got exposed to design thinking and lean experimentation and agile, and those activities that are normally associated with corporate work. I was exposed to them in the corporate environment, and then thought, wow, with some adaptation to the culture and the way that nonprofit organizations function, this could really help us get to answers quickly, really engage stakeholders in a whole new way, and really ignite the passion of employees. So I've really worked over these past 5 years to bring those methodologies to the sector to help us learn more efficiently and effectively to create deeper change and create deeper impact. And then Possibility Project is really about having more deeper and more disruptive conversations about how we function as a sector overall, where Pause for Change is highly tactical of how to apply innovative methods. Possibility Project is about the big, bold, large questions that we have to address as a sector to create deeper change. So it's the thread that binds the two is all around disruption and really changing the way that we change the world. So yeah, that's my work.
Oh, I love that. I have being in nonprofit now, with never have had an intention to start a nonprofit. I just, I fell into it and fell in love with it. I've always felt like, coming from the corporate world, that nonprofit has been ripe for disruption forever. And it seems like one of those ones that it's not celebrated to be a disruptor in an industry that's technically meant to disrupt the status quo.
Absolutely. And there's so many best practices and acceptable ways that are dictated and designed by dominant culture that we should behave, and what we do, and how boards function, right? It's highly regulated and so many expectations. How we fundraise is highly regulated. Who has get to hold positions of power in the sector is highly dominated by white folks and white culture. And there isn't a lot of room for shifting things around. And there's so much fear of risk of, oh gosh, what if we create a program that fails? Or what if we, frustrate a donor? Or, what if we upset our collaborative partnerships. Oh, so it just makes people stuck in the ways that they normally work and how it's reinforced in these best practices and expectations. And I think it's really awful because it's led to a complete lack of imagination and innovation and lack of transformation in the sector that has held us back. Because if you look at what we've accomplished, I mean, I'm not satisfied. I know we can do better, and we need, especially now, new skills to solve new problems, and the ones that are going to come and keep coming and keep coming.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so, one thing I would love for you to touch on, just for some people that might not be as familiar with design thinking, which I'm a huge fan of design thinking. I love it. I love doing it. What are some of maybe like an example or something you could use to explain where design thinking fits when working in the nonprofit sector?
That's a great question. Yeah, design thinking, in a nutshell, to me, what it means is asking great questions and engaging with stakeholders and co-creation. So you're not creating for, you're creating with people. So much of the time in the nonprofit sector, how our boards function, our executive leadership teams function, even our program designers, is that we think we know the answer. And if we know that, more than 90% of the sector is white and doesn't have a shared background with communities that they serve, it's really hard to be deeply connected to the pain and greatest needs of communities we're supposed to serve. So it's a really great way to identify what you need to learn, to go engage with stakeholders in a very, hopefully, unbiased and equity focused way, to go engage with communities to understand, what do you need most? What assets and abilities and abundance do you have where you don't come into it as expert and as extractor of resources? You're there to harness and engage and support and empower organizations and communities that you're working with. So it's about asking different questions, and it's about then the part that I like about design thinking, but I think it needs a little bit more meat, and that's why I love experimentation being added to design thinking, is that they're in the prototyping stages, you can go a little bit further. So with experimentation, you can identify assumptions that are embedded within your solution and then test it and get rapid results, which is a little bit different. It deepens the learning of what behavior and action will they take. And so I think that there's a huge role for design thinking that's missing, of us listening and not seeing ourselves as expert, but seeing our communities as experts of their own lived experience. And we need to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. If you're a leader that doesn't have the lived experience of the community that you're serving, then you need to, for one thing, fully admit that, and admit that you don't know everything, and you need their voices to make those decisions. And one thing that made me think of the experimentation part is very much inherent in most startup worlds, which is the fail fast mentality, which sounds like very similar to what you're talking to, of nonprofits feeling afraid to make a mistake and they don't do it right. Instead of failing fast, they work for years and years and years, sometimes on these initiatives that finally see the light of day, and they miss the mark completely on something, versus if they would have just either done like a minimum viable product type of mentality, fail fast, let's keep iterating from there, that years later they have a great program that they spent most of the time testing and iterating instead of just developing.
Yeah, I worked with a foundation that had funded a project at the cost of $500,000 over 3 years. And the program was not successful. It was not going well. And it took us 6 hours to identify what the problem was. Within 6 hours of the first day of our deep dive experience, we do 2-day experiences with organizations, we knew what it was. And they had not connected with a key stakeholder that was really the source of progress and the source of connection for the entire project coming together. And it just illuminated how, with the best of intentions and the most beautiful of logic models and Gantt charts and all of the promises, especially that we love to embed in our grant proposals, we often do not know the answer. and we don't know how people are going to respond. And so you don't have to build a pilot. Our teams in 45 minutes will run experiments that will give them tremendous signals about whether or not they should pursue an idea. And we also take failure off the table, where there's no such thing as failure. It's all learning. It's not the success is, instead of spending those 3 years and $500,000, the success is maybe you might learn this is not the best program, or it's not the right time, or these are not the right partners, and you can, pivot and think of something else. Or you get early validation that gives you confidence to really double down your effort and energy to create an outstanding program. So it's it's new skills that we really don't use in the sector.
Yeah. That makes me think a little bit about, a lot of grants, the way that they're worded is that you need to sometimes showcase that this is a proven model, yet they want it to be innovative. And so you're always juggling this, okay, I need to prove myself, but yet it needs to be brand new and innovative. And a lot of times something that's proven is not brand new and innovative anymore. So do you work with teams and organizations about balancing that out at all?
Yes, and what's so interesting, there's so many interesting pieces in there, is a lot of organizations love best practices. So they like to copy and paste from other regions or organizations and be inspired, which is fine, but they need to still test it in their community, in their own backyard, because we've seen a lot of those projects fail. And what's also interesting is when we have interviewed the organizations that we're copying and pasting from, when we offer them complete silence and anonymity and we say what's working and what's not, most of those conversations have resulted in agencies telling us that it's not working and not to tell anyone. Like they will say, yes, we were on stage at that conference and we won the award and we're seen as a best practice, but don't tell anyone that we've spent $2 million developing it and we're having a ridiculously hard time recruiting and retaining engagement. So that's been shocking. And I engage and I expect all of my teams to talk to those best practice sources to really interrogate them in new ways and build relationships so they can get some trusted information. And then, the issue around risk is super tricky because, especially in philanthropy, foundations do not like to be the first out of the gate. They want to watch and see. Mark Rand said this great on Possibility Project. They don't want to look like a buffoon in front of their colleagues. They want someone else to put their neck out and try it, and then they want to see what happens, and then they'll all fall into line. Then they'll all, share all this stuff. So it's really tricky. Organizations have a hard time getting funding for the riskier proposals that could be really game-changing. But also blind adoption of best practices and touting it as such is also quasi misleading if the organization hasn't vetted the idea in their own community.
And I could definitely see that being extremely difficult if it is a best practice that you adopt and then you go to the foundations and say, look, this is a proven model, we're just taking and copying and pasting it. And so all the foundations jump on board because they don't feel like they're sticking their necks out anymore, because it's like, oh, well, these people were successful with it, we should be successful too. And then it ends up that it doesn't work, and you find out later, like, no, it never did work. And so it's, you're right back to where you started from but then at least they can point the finger at somebody, I guess, to say like, well, we thought it was the best thing to do, but these people were lying to us, which doesn't help anything either, pointing fingers. So
I mean, I always say we create a ton of unintentional waste in the sector trying to do good, right? We have the best of intentions. I have done this in developing programs myself. I've been awarded grant funding for programs that I've designed and they have failed. And did I tell anyone? No. Like, who would you tell and how do you tell? Like, there's not even a way, there's not even a platform to share failure and celebrate it. So what organizations do is they hide it. They hide the failure. They don't want their donors to know. They don't want their board to know their resources went, in sort of these empty holes in these unexpected ways. So what happens as a sector is we just keep recreating other people's mistakes without even knowing it. Because a lot of these solutions that organizations will bring me in to help them test make perfect sense. When they describe it to me, I think, oh, that sounds really interesting. That sounds like it'll work. Half the time it doesn't. And we know why, which is what I really value about the process, is it's not a black box. It's not a mystery. We know exactly why something's going to work and why it won't work right away. And so, organizations don't often have this process to make decisions and to find their way through that uncertainty. So you end up with hit or miss results, which honestly and ethically, we don't have time to waste. Right? People have true need. People are hungry. People are living without homes, especially now. People are in such crisis. And as we just sort of find our way as a sector and experiment in really inefficient ways, do pilots and all these other things, it's ridiculous. And it just shows the lack of urgency, and it shows the lack of connectivity and the connection to the pain and to the people that are really experiencing the most.
Do you foresee there ever being a point where failure is more normalized and talked about? In general, we're every sector that you look at, for the most part, nobody really wants to talk about the failures. And for the most part, it usually comes in case studies at business schools and stuff. You don't necessarily want to be that case study. But do you see that potentially being a possibility where it's not, you don't get a cloud over you for going out there and trying something and realizing that it doesn't work?
I hope it gets more acceptable. And I think what will start to shift that is when we celebrate more and more of their stories. So they're not case studies of gloom and doom, but it's like, this is what they thought would work. Can we all agree that sounds lovely? And here are the 8 reasons why they learned that was not going to work. So that may or may not apply to their exact community, but that learning experience, that learning journey can become inspiring.
Mhm.
Because what I've seen with organizations that decided not to build the exact solution, they usually found something else that was not even on the radar. It was like they started to get that, my one solution is precious, this tunnel vision. And then when they opened up and asked different questions and worked in new ways, then they were like, oh, there's this sea of opportunity that we didn't even imagine was there. And so there's often lights at the end of the tunnel, right? So there's unexpected opportunity. There's extreme cost savings, right? Some of these organizations are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars not implementing some of these ideas in a really short time frame. And so I hope that those stories they'll inspire people. And I think that if we can get better with collaboration and coalition building, authentic collaboration across the sector, so we get rid of a lot of this, what Vule talks about, the Hunger Games mentality in the sector and the high competition that we see. If we can really turn to more of a collective approach where we are sharing positives and negatives, we have more authentic relationships with our boards, with our executive leadership team, with our staff. I think that's going to help create a fertile space for learning, because it's not failure, it's learning.
I agree. I agree. And in general, the populations being served would all be the better for it if we're just opening up to learning. Yeah. Do you have an example of, and you don't have to say names or anything, of one of these organizations that had a tunnel vision that you worked with, and then they saw this huge amount of opportunity that they didn't even realize was there?
Yeah. We worked with, well, it's kind of like that. It was a nonprofit, and the greatest need and the challenge that they were facing was that their families in their community needed low cost, really high quality early childcare, early, childhood learning experiences like preschool. And they knew that there were not a lot of options, that parents that earned too much they couldn't access subsidies. Parents that didn't earn enough might have had subsidies, but it wasn't enough for them to pay the fees of high quality childcare. And also the locations did not work for a lot of these families, so it would have a lot of transportation time and cost. And so what was interesting is they had some ideas of what they could do. I mean, they worked in this early childhood space. They had seen what other people had done. And we do very abundant brainstorming. So we say, no judgment, the crazier the better. Just go bold and think of 40 different ideas, so that that You can prioritize those, but you have so many options. You're not just working with one, which gives you that scarcity, anxiety and panic. And so the team, I remember I was with them when they wrote this sticky for this idea, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. If someone saw that we thought of this idea, they would just laugh like, this is wild and crazy. And we said, put it up there, put it up there. And through experimentation, they tested it, they validated it. They got $500,000 to build the first pilot program based on all of the data they had collected. And now they're getting angel investment to scale their idea. And this was a crazy idea that they were like, oh. And so I say now with my teams, write ideas that make you giggle. Do you think, oh my goodness? Because through testing, you can easily know what's going to work and what's not. So if you find out right away it doesn't work, who cares? You go to the next one, right? If you find out it's super awesome, that's great. Let's keep going. And so it's yeah, it's fun. I never know what's going to happen. I always tell people, when you hire me, I'm not a typical consultant. I'm not there to tell you exactly what to do, because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not your stakeholder, but I'll give you a process and a framework and support for you to get to the answers to make evidence-informed decisions. And so it's always a mystery to me, which is fun and slightly scary. But yeah, it's always good learning.
Oh, that's awesome. It's always incredible, the idea that you think is just a shot in the dark that actually ends up working.
Yeah, and conversely, organizations, I worked with one, and their usual way to problem solve was to create a 20-person task force, to take 10 months at a cost of over $100,000 of investment to explore something. And instead, we said, okay, give us 4 people. In 6 weeks, we learned we shouldn't build something, and we only spent about $6,000. So that was a huge win, even though that team was terrified to present their findings because they really wanted to build this best practice idea. We learned all the reasons why we shouldn't. And again, when we had that conversation with that other award-winning program in private, they told us that that's exactly what they had found 2 years in. So it was really great that through this rapid process, they could get those same answers and save so much money and time and resources. And then they had all the knowledge they needed to decide where this should, go into their area of priority for their organization.
So, one thing I was wondering, so once you work with a team and then and say that they do find out that what they want to do or something that they've built actually is proven and they continue with it, do you work with them during the time that you spend with them on how to implement like a rapid continuous improvement process or anything like that, so that 5-10 years down the road, if this program's still implemented, that it doesn't look the exact same as it did the first day, that they're consistently implementing these mindsets that you're teaching them when you're working with them?
Yeah, I mean, our goal is that there's a couple pieces. We talk about that individuals and organizations have habits and how they solve problems. So there's a cue or a trigger. It leads to an action, which results in a reward of some kind. So there's a typical way that people work. So we say, when you have that cue or trigger, when something's uncertain or something's not working, we kind of help them identify, where are you losing constituents, right? Where is a program not working? Where are you having conflict with staff? Where is your strategic plan kind of gone sideways? What are all the cues that might make you go, oh, we need to do something different? Instead of taking the normal action, use the pause skills. And so we invest in a specific project with a specific team, but we really are investing in that organizational culture, starting to shift and work differently to have those new skills. So it really is about long-term application of the skills, and how we couch it is terms of execution and search. If you are doing a project and you're working on a program, and over time you see that there is some need for improvement, maybe going from paper timesheets to digital timesheets to save time on transportation and paperwork, like that's a process improvement, more of an execution type project. You can do some research, you can do some small testing, and then get your project managers involved, right? The part where you need to use the pause skills is when you're in uncertainty, when you don't know which way to go. You have no idea if it's going to work. You have no idea why it's not working. That's when you need to use the skills in a different way. So we tell people, like, do not fall into that trap of putting uncertainty into execution, because you're going to execute on something and probably create waste and get it wrong. And you're going to hold your people accountable to something that's highly unknown. And that just creates a whole bunch of anxiety and tension within an organization. So we say, like, call it what it is. If it's execution and minor tweaks, great. Project manage the heck out of that. If it's something that no one honestly knows what you should do, use the skills, give people time and space to really learn. And then when they do validate something that will work, throw it over to the project management team, and then they can go into execution mode. And so it's also about finding people in your organization that are certain execution people, right? Because some people, they love execution. 1 + 1 must always equal 2, right? And then you have other people that want wide open space. They're the troublemakers, the question askers. They always want to try something new. So put them and their superpowers in the right place, and then have them work together to really take a project forward.
Yeah. Do you, is it normally when you're working with these teams that you find out about those different strengths of the people that are involved right away, or do you guys do like a, like a strengths finder assessment or something like that?
No, it really, it's funny that you asked. It really, it happens in the 2 days. We always start with a 2-day event, and then we follow it with 12 weeks of team coaching. Because in those 2 days, that's where we tell the sponsor, the person at the organization that's helping us, put everything together. We tell them, give us your troublemaker. Give us your naysayer, the person that's worked there 32 years, and this is the way they've always done it. Give me those 2 people on one team. I'm not afraid. And that's awesome. Like, we've seen the troublemakers that sometimes are causing too many problems because they are too open, right? It's hard to rein them in. They now have a process to use. And the people that say, that'll never work, we tried that 10 years ago, they start to work differently. They start to see a new way to come together. So what it is you take people and you put them in their innovation role and that innovation experience, right? And that uncertainty, and they have to perform and test and use those new skills. That's what we usually start to see and can make conclusions. So I never would write off someone that, a sponsor might warn me, like, this guy is so hard to work with. He holds back on everything. He's such like he blocks all progress. I have seen those people totally transformed in 2 days. And so I always wait and see what's going to happen. And then what we do is we do a couple of those cycles of challenges and learning in teams. And we start to pull out some of the rock stars. And our goal is to do a train the trainer, where those people can start to lead this within the organization, independent of our work. And we never know who those people are going to be, because it just brings people to life in a whole new way. And then those people are like, no, thank you. Oh, I thought I'd like it, but I don't. Great. We can use them as allies in other ways.
I mean, that entire process just seems like something that across so many sectors that it needs to be implemented and used, far beyond nonprofit. It's just, it seems you're touching on something that I think is just an issue everywhere, in most cases where we're all trying to come up with new ideas to do things better in a better way, and we get stopped.
Yeah, I mean, I work with nonprofits. I've done work with local governments, work with foundations, for-profit companies. And then as an entrepreneur, I like to support other entrepreneurs and other new ventures, because anyone can absolutely use this process to address any area of uncertainty. And people have told me they've even used it in their families with their kids. Like, I need to focus on empathy. I need to understand, like, what do I not know? I need to have an authentic engagement and conversation, observation with this person, right? My daughter, son, whoever it is, my partner. And then I'm going to create some potential solutions, and there might be some assumptions. So let's intentionally do some little experiments and see what happens. And so it works on so many levels. And absolutely, I wish everyone would work this way and share the common language.
Yeah. that would be amazing. There'd be so many things that could have potentially been solved by now that continue to come up.
Exactly. skills, you can just make a to-do list of like next, next, next. Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole issue of, one of the common issues that, you didn't say these words exactly, but it makes me think of, one of the greatest failures of anything and any new idea is lack of buy-in from the
Mhm.
key people. And so a lot of times, the way that we naturally want to approach something like that is we have different defense mechanisms that come up when somebody's trying to defy and we're not getting the answer that we want from them, versus taking that empathetic route and making a list and coming to common terms amongst each other and testing out different things and think, because I mean, regardless of how great of an idea it is, if you don't have buy-in, it's probably not going to succeed.
Yes, and empathy is really one of the foundations of the skills and the approach. It's walking in the shoes of another person. It's understanding why. It's asking whole new questions and even observations, like watching people in action. It's a little bit different in these times, but it teaches you so much, and it shows why we are often so wrong, because we have data, we have experience, we have our, our lens, our bias that we put out there, and we say, oh, this is the problem. And I cannot tell you the number of projects where we've said, okay, like we have to trust them, right? It's their community. And then the moment we go in front of a stakeholder, they say, no, I don't care about that. I care about this. And then we'll hear it consistently, and it's a shared problem. And then after, an hour, 2 hours, they have to entirely pivot to focus on a whole new problem, because that was the problem they thought from their perspective, and it was not the problem. And so it just shows that we don't have a lot of empathetic connection. We have a lot of sympathetic feelings of like, oh, that looks rough over there. I get it intellectually. I get it. Ugh. But we do not understand what it is to wake up and live a 24/7 experience in people's shoes. And so I think there's a huge opportunity. And it also, just focus on external. We often forget about empathy for our internal teams, with our own colleagues, to think, how do I make your life harder? How could I make your life easier? Like, what are areas of frustration? So one thing we call out for our teams is, if you're around a conference room debating, right, that we should do this, we should do this, you're just debating around assumptions. So you need to just get out of the room and go talk to the people impacted. Don't waste any more time. And you just need to focus on, what do I not understand that's driving their behavior? And where do I need to meet them where they are to create a solution that will actually solve their problem and create value? And you cannot do that without empathy.
Agreed. That goes for, I love that question of how am I making your life harder? I feel like in any relationship that comes up, or, you adore it, whether it's a friendship or a significant other too, of there's ways that we're making other people's lives harder that we don't realize, that are slowly deteriorating the connection that we have and that relationship that we have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And through connection, I mean, Brene Brown's done amazing work in this space, right? Through connection, through learning, through seeing what it is to be that other person, to have their job, to have their family, to have all that they're balancing and juggling, it's a game changer. Once what we say to our teams is, when you're interviewing the stakeholders, your goal is to carry them in your heart. Your goal is to elicit stories where they share stories of their experiences and what it is and how they tried to solve the problem and what worked and what didn't, and what do they wish they had if they had a magic wand. And you really want to get to why. And then you carry those people and their need with you, and it just drives the passion and commitment to the work, because you know the faces, right? You know the tales that they have shared, and it's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. So since you mentioned story, I would love to talk a little bit about Possibility Project and the conversations that, so I was looking at and listened to some of the videos that you had, that you've done this year, because it kicked off earlier this year, right?
Yes, and May was our first episode. Yes.
Okay, May, yeah. Which was a very tumultuous time in America. I mean, it continues to be May, June. And I absolutely love the difficult conversations that you were having people come on and talk about, that you've continued to have on and talk about. And I mean, there's so many different topics, but I was wondering if you had one in particular that you feel like no matter who you are, this is one that everybody really needs to listen to.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think, gosh, I love Whiteness of the Social Sector. I like that one. Andrew Plumley, Sean Thomas Brightfield, and Dr. Lakia Cherry are just amazing leaders and so experienced in this space. And I've done so much work, with Building Movement Project and Andrew's work at the Alliance of American Museums, and previously at Pro Inspire and Equity in the Center, and Dr. Lakia Cherry with having a social work lens. They're already friends also. So like hanging out with them as a group was amazing because they have such great dynamic and such respect and love for each other. But also, the topics they discuss from so many angles is so important, because so much of what we see in this sector and why we are highly dysfunctional is based upon white supremacy, and it's based upon white norms and colonial thinking. And so a lot of that's been a key theme of many of our conversations we've had. We've had 10 episodes now. White supremacy in sort of white dominant culture has been a significant thread that's popped up, no matter if we're talking about collaboration, if we're talking about investments, it pops up again and again. So I think it's a topic as a sector that we have to keep diving into, and understanding our foundations of, who started the sector, who currently leads the sector, and how might we continue to disrupt it, because the more diversity we know that if we have it, we will be more successful. We will have richer conversations and way different outcomes and possibilities. So it's, that one I think I would call out as one of my favorites.
Okay, and so I can definitely see the going into that too, like the complexities around the white savior mentality.
Yes.
Absolutely comes up in this sector all the time. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And it's more. I guess from my perception, it's almost normalized that it's imperceptible to a lot of people that this is what white saviorism can look like and what it is, versus and I think it also comes back to what we were talking about earlier too, about the lived experience. And if you don't have the lived experience as the leader, and you are trying to help a community that honestly you've never been in their shoes, having to come to that through empathy, but also the team that you're building. So I honestly feel like somebody has to have a lived experience in the leadership team for the community that you're serving. Otherwise, empathy can help, but that lived experience is what truly can change the mentality of the team.
Yeah, totally. And I think that white leaders need to step aside. I think they need to make space and room for leaders of color and indigenous leaders to step up, and they're there. I just was having a conversation about this false narrative, a lack of pipeline of qualified talent in the sector. Totally bogus. That is a totally false narrative. I think that it's there's so many great articles about how white culture has sort of dominated the entire sector, and that has squeezed out room for leadership opportunity. It has squeezed out room for authentic connection and belonging. So you have tokenistic practices that result in microaggressions. So even if organizations do hire a staff person or leader of color, it's that foundational piece of what they're being welcomed into is not there. It is not a good experience. So it's shifting the entire way that we frame the sector, I think, is really important. And what people don't understand is it affects all of us, and that white saviorism and that colonial thinking and the white dominant thinking is really damaging to change makers. Nova Wren was one of our speakers on another episode, and it was all about design for healing. And that as change makers, we carry with us this idea of like rapid action. We must respond and we must do something now. That's highly colonial thinking. The whole idea of I, as one person, can transform my organization by myself. That's super colonial thinking. You need other people, right? You cannot do this work alone. And so it kind of ties into that white saviorism that like, I'm here, I'm the one, I own the change, I'll save you. And it's all on me. Not only is that ridiculous, but it's highly damaging if that work is driven by ego and expectation of success and productivity and what that means. That is going to erode that person's entire sense of well-being. And so if we have a sector that's led and mixed up in all of this nonsense, we're not going to be at our best for each other, for ourselves, or for the communities we serve. So we have definitely got to shake some stuff up and work in new ways.
Is there, obviously there's a ton of information and topics that are being talked about, the uncomfortable conversations, our own work that we have to do on ourselves to become more aware of the own damage that we're doing. How are we making people's lives more difficult by not realizing the own ingrained societal norms of colonialism, white saviorism, all of that. But in the nonprofit sector in particular, where it's filled with people who want to do good, and I do believe that they're not purposely trying to be nefarious. They just it happens, and they don't realize it. Are there any small steps or unique things that are different about the work that people can be doing from the inside out to start bringing about that change that needs to be happening, of stepping aside, which ego can get the best of anybody, of stepping aside when they've been in this industry for like 20, 30 years, and this is a part of their identity, and for them to step aside and can be a very difficult journey to take themselves on of self-realization. But are there things that people should be looking at, whether you're a leader or whether you're coming in into this industry and you have a passion for it, to be mindful and to try to help drive that shift that needs to be happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point is, like you said, you have to start inside, you have to start within. And what I have found to be very helpful is you need to pay attention to where you feel uncomfortable. So, you enter a space and you might feel discomfort, or you might be making assumptions, and you notice that. You're like, oh, where did that come from? Like, racist thoughts might pop up. That's what you need to sit with. What I find most people do is they just go, oh, discomfort, move along, right? They want to just like jump over it and progress. But that's the stuff, that's the signal, that's the piece that's saying to you, there's something here that's making you feel icky or off or unprepared or threatened. That's the stuff you need to think about. And it's also not the job of people of color to help white folks do that. White folks need to help other white folks and help themselves figure that stuff out and go deep and pull out the yuck of how they were raised, what they heard in their household growing up, what passed as acceptable when it wasn't, what have they let pass that as acceptable that wasn't, and where do they have that feeling of guilt and shame, right? So it's digging up all of the stuff and going there, and it never stops. It is a continual process. And I think you can apply that to the next level up, right? Like, what are you doing in your family? What are you doing in your friendship circles? Like, what are you allowing or not? What are you advocating for or not, right? Who are you? How do you show up? And the key with all of this is accountability. And I was just talking to someone a couple weeks ago, like, there's no consequence for being a bad ally. There's no consequence. There's no one watching, right? Sometimes there is, but only at the highest levels, right? So you have to hold yourself accountable to sticking in the discomfort and learning from it and finding new ways to move in the world. And I think organizations can do that same process. You kind of do yourself and your initial ripple. And then if you're part of an organization, how do we as an organization make other folks uncomfortable? How do we feel uncomfortable? What do we need to learn and do differently, and then get help? I mean, I really think that people do need specialists to help them. And it's not a 2-hour training about DEI, like racial consciousness and like unconscious bias. That is garbage. That is less than a solution or a band-aid. That's worthless, essentially. So get a really highly skilled leader of color, I would recommend, that can lead your organization through those conversations and through an action plan that you're actually going to make structural and systemic change, which is going to include the most uncomfortable pieces of changing your board, changing your leadership, changing composition of your staff, rebuilding relationships and reconnections with community. I mean, it's a lot of work, and that's why a lot of organizations love the performative statements, but they have nothing to back it up. And it's a long-term process.
Yeah, it's essentially, it's the never-ending journey, right? There's always, there's more than, I was trying to actually, the other morning, I was thinking about this, of what would it actually look like and take for this to no longer be an issue and a topic of conversation. And from my perspective, my thought was, it's always a part of our history, no matter what. So no matter what, this is going to be talked about. It needs to be talked about. So no matter what, the journey is always, from generation to generation, it's going to continue on, because for one thing, if we don't talk about it, it's very likely and very possible that it would just it'll start receding back. So it has to be just exactly what you said, of just, it's this continuous journey. It's not a 3-hour seminar and then you're good, you're cured.
Oh, and I mean, we are creating history at this very moment, right? Like, we are creating history, and we have a responsibility to view things differently. And so many people go, well, that was in the past. I was just reading an op-ed that I found very disappointing, but it was like, that stuff's all in the past. We need to kind of forgive and just move on. Like, no, because what people don't understand is systems and structures that we have today were created on purpose. They behave and function the way that they were intended to. And it was nefarious. It was intentional. The policies on the books are not by accident. The procedures that we all follow and buy into are not an accident. Who created them was also not an accident. And so we have to continually be vigilant about who is making decisions that affect tons, millions and millions of people, who is responsible for being held accountable. And we are seeing so many examples right now of folks that are not really doing the work because they don't have to, and there's not consequences. But that is entirely unacceptable. And we have to find ways to upend those power structures to recreate history from this moment and every moment.
Yeah, that reminds me of the discussion about how America became an economic powerhouse, starting as this scrappy country that, we stole land that was not ours. So that's an entirely other conversation that goes even beyond this. So like from the outset of the founding, we were doing nefarious things, and we knew we were taking this land that does not belong to us. But then also the way that we rose to economic power was through the production of cotton, which was on the backs of slaves. So it's like the entire history of how we got to where we are is a completely nefarious system that was built with people like you said, fully knowledgeable of what they were doing, but decided in their own frame and in their own perspective it was okay to do it this way because of their own belief system.
Yeah, and we're seeing it today with essential workers.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
We're seeing it today of, if you look at the wealth gap and you look at what Black income, if you look at generational wealth, none of those outcomes are accidental, right? They are a complete manifestation of history and current time. And so it's just, it's still happening, right? If you look at the organizations and people that have profited during COVID, that is fascinating, right? To
Yeah.
see who has thrived in this environment, to see whose stock portfolio has just become so much more plentiful. And even our foundations that, while they've been applauded for, going beyond the 5%, or giving unrestricted funds, or, unexpected surprise gifts. Okay, a lot of their portfolios have grown. They've been doing fine. And so it's, we have a total lack of critical conversations about how are we creating a future? How are we writing what's to come with these actions that we're taking, these small actions and collective actions, and the lack of social responsibility, and the lack of commitment to justice that we see in this country. So to try to make things new, we have to really dismantle and reimagine how we function as a society. That, what does it mean to be a powerhouse? It means that 1% get to have a great time. Is that what it means to be a powerhouse? Well, can we reject that? And what does it mean to reject that? And then how do we have empathetic conversations, and how to bring everybody on board so that everyone, can have full access to power and potential and opportunity, because that's what it's about. And we're not even close to that.
Yep. Agree 100%. And I, since we're running out of time, I think you made excellent points that I cannot disagree with whatsoever. And but I guess to try to at least sustain hope that not all is lost. That I mean, what are some of the bright spots that you're seeing that give you hope that this can and will happen, hopefully sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, some of the changes that we've seen Devin Davey, my co-creator, and I were just writing about some of these themes of, what's the dysfunction? What are those themes? And what's the hopeful pieces? And a lot of what we're seeing is that, equity is in the mouths of many people, that we're not talking about this, right? So it's top of mind, it's top of the agenda. Organizations are figuring out, how do we implement new ways of working and being? So that's super exciting. I mean, really, honestly, when we started Possibility Project, was we've always had these disruptive conversations, but just in like dark corners. We joke with other people that were also disruptive, but we started seeing the things that we would talk about in the paper, like mainstream media. And we thought, okay, like it's time to scale these conversations. Let's take it to another level. So that's really exciting that, people are willing to talk about these big, bold concepts and try to hold folks accountable. That's really cool. And just, new forms of leadership. I think it's going to be really exciting to see what's happening, because we are seeing change. I mean, not only with, with President Biden coming on, but what, all the changes that are going to be happening at different levels in the sector as well. That's really inspiring and giving me hope. So I think it's like time will tell, right? It's letting hope drive the imagination that we need to think about what's possible, and to just really double down our efforts on just expansive opportunity, expansive possibility, and learning what we could try and what could actually change things. That gives me hope that there is always an opportunity for learning, and for, continually holding that mirror up to the sector to see what we can do differently.
Yeah, and I think that I'm continuously hopeful that we keep finding more and more of us that are seeing this, and that we're willing to have the difficult conversations, even if it's one to one. But as a community, that community is growing, and therefore the amount of pressure getting put on those that are in those positions that can really influence it, there's more and more of us getting louder and louder, to really change where, just a few years ago, even, it would have just been a whisper that they could easily ignore, and they could turn back around and keep doing what they were doing. So that gives me hope too, that at least people are being heard more, and they're being taken seriously.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So for anybody who wants to connect with your work for Pause for Change, but then also watch the conversations that we were talking about with Possibility Project, where are the best places for them to find you?
Yeah, for Pause for Change, that's the website. So if you go to pauseforchange.com, you can see the different ways that we work and what we can do to help organizations. And then Possibility Project is possibilityproject.org. And on that site, we have all of the videos, every recording that we've done. And then after each recording, we compile an extensive list of resources that the speakers offer, that pop up in the chat, that we find that are connected. So it's a lot of articles and references and really great pieces. We have a set of resources under every single episode. And then that's where we advertise upcoming events that people can RSVP. It's always free. It's on Zoom, it's accessible to anyone. And then if folks can't join live, which includes breakout sessions and connecting and networking, they can always watch the episodes online. The recordings are usually posted about 48 hours after each episode.
Okay, great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for coming on and for sharing so much. I feel like I learned a lot too. And so I hope everybody had something that they took away. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, and thank you for the work that you do. I love that you're highlighting voices and perspectives and creating this community of your own where we can all come together to support each other's work. I think that's fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the goal, is that even if we have different perspectives, we can all at least have a conversation about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.